Hi there, everyone, and welcome to our Connect with HSPC webcast. So my name is Melanie McGreggor, and I work at the Canadian Mental Health Association, the Halton Region branch, and I'm a member of the Halton Suicide Prevention Coalition as well. So it's my pleasure to facilitate this episode today that's going to talk about some really vital supports that are available in our community, because that's one thing that we really want to do at HSPC is help people know what's available to support them in the community. So we have three wonderful guests with us today. We have Peggy, Dara, and Deb, and each of them are with a service in our community that can support folks who are in crisis or looking for that support. So we're going to talk a little bit about those organizations and services. So Peggy is from Coast, Dara is from Distress Centre Halton, and Deb is with us from Reach Out Centre for Kids, or ROC. So we're going to get started and talk about these great services in our community. So Peggy, we're going to start with you. So I know you and I, we've worked together for some time. You are with Coast, which was a program of Canadian Mental Health Association. So can you tell us a little bit about what Coast provides and the type of folks in our community that you support?
Absolutely. So COAST stands for Crisis Outreach and Support Team, and it's a partnership between the Canadian Mental Health Association and Halton Regional Police Services. So what we offer is a service for those who are 16 years of age and up in the region of Halton. We provide a 24-hour crisis line where there's always someone there 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And we also have an outreach team that consists of a mental health worker like myself, accompanied by a non-uniformed police officer who is specially trained in mental health. The outreach team provides a risk assessment on site to those who are in crisis in the community. The crisis line is available to provide telephone support, crisis intervention, guidance for family members and loved ones and healthcare professionals who may be dealing with someone who's in crisis. And of course, that direct support to the individual who's in need of crisis intervention as well. And we define crisis as kind of like a situation where one's normal coping skills can't manage the situation. So it's different from distress. It's more unique, it's more acute, and more high risk.
Right, that's very interesting, because that's a question that people often have is, what is a crisis and how does that compare to distress? So that's great that you clarified that. And how long have you been with Coast, Peggy?
I don't recall. I think it's about 14 years now. I've worked in mental health and addictions for the past 35 years, and I've been with Coast for about 14 years.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, I know. Yeah, you're certainly doing great things out in the community, and I know, you've met lots of people, and lots of people have met you, and you've really made a great difference. So thank you for that. So Dara, you are from Distress Centre Halton. Can you tell us a little bit about Distress Centre Halton and the services that you provide and who you support?
Absolutely. Distress Centre Halton's been around since 1974, and it's an amalgamation of three centers that pull together: Burlington Telecare and the Halton Distress Centre, and the North Halton Distress Centre in Georgetown, and the Oakville Crisis Centre. So we amalgamated just in 2019 to have a bigger reach in the community, and we are a distress and crisis line run by 197 phone volunteers that do the inbound calls for people suffering from stress, isolation, someone who needs a friendly voice to talk to. And we also have an outbound program, which is called our Telecheck program, where we reach out into the community with prearranged calls to some seniors that are struggling with isolation, people struggling with their mental health, or someone just going through a really tough time that needs temporary support. And our tagline would be, we support all people in our community to better cope with crises, loneliness, and emotional stress. And we are a safety net for the community in that anyone, anywhere, anytime can call us. Our youngest caller was 9 years old, struggling with suicide ideation, and our oldest caller is in his 90s. So we say we're there 7/24 to take calls from anyone in the community who does need that soul connection to talk to. I think that's about it for what I was going to say.
Oh, that's great. I know, Dara, you've been a member of the Halton Suicide Prevention Coalition for a couple or a few years now. So yeah, that's great. So yeah, I know we've worked together in that capacity, but yeah, you talked about the Distress Center. Certainly gone through a lot of change in the, in the past year, couple of years with that growth. So that's amazing.
Yeah, and I think everyone went through such change when we went through our state of emergency and all of our services had to shut down and how we responded. So we were always just within our 2 centers working away, and we quickly went remote. So I would say probably 9/10 of our volunteers are working from home right now, but we still have people. I'm here at the center today. I've got a volunteer working out front. So we are here for the community. Probably more. We increased capacity through the pandemic with going remote.
Absolutely. That's great. Thanks for that.
Thank
And
you.
Deb is also another member of our Halton Suicide Prevention Coalition, and Deb is with us from ROC. So Deb, can you tell us a little bit about ROC and your crisis services?
Sure. So Children's Accredited Mental Health Center is what ROC is, and we service all of Halton. Our crisis line runs 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We have virtual services in place currently for our walk-in and for our counseling programs, as well as all of our group programs, and those can all be sort of looked at through our website. But for our crisis line, what we want folks to know is that if they're calling 905-878-9785, they're calling our answering center. They're leaving their name and their number, and then we're calling them back within a very short window, a maximum of 20 minutes, they're told when they call. It's usually much shorter. And a crisis is defined by the caller for our line. So there could be a multitude of things that present. Some could be parent-child conflict. Some could be substance use, misuse. Some could be homelessness. Some could be suicidal ideation or self-harm. We would work with them with whatever presented, and we would make a plan to address the need that they're calling for. We would help them navigate to the most appropriate service, and we would help them find resources in the community that would meet those needs that they're calling about. If they were calling in regards to suicide or self-harm, we would be doing a risk assessment with them by phone, and then we would be helping them to navigate a safety plan and ensuring that they had a support person who would help them enact that safety plan. And that it could include things like connecting with their family doctor. It could include connecting with their social worker that they're currently meeting with. It could include involving a parent or another adult that they feel is safe. It could include helping them connect with emergency services via police or ambulance if they needed to have imminent risk addressed. So those are sort of the kinds of things that we would do from our service.
That's great. And I know, we've certainly talked about it at the HSPC meetings, but just the greater awareness of mental health overall in the community. But I think also mental health when it comes to kids, because I think for the longest time, the thought was, kids, they're not going to struggle in that way. But I think now there's a lot more awareness of how kids can and do struggle. So it's great that support's there. Okay, so this was great to find out a little bit about what each service does. So I know we've talked a little bit around what some of the differences are. So what's crisis versus distress? What about kids and adults and how people may connect? But tell me, Peggy, maybe I'll direct this question to you at first. What would happen if someone called COAST and maybe COAST wasn't the appropriate service for them? So it was a young person or someone maybe that COAST wouldn't be the most fitting service for them at that time. How does COAST usually handle those types of calls?
Well, we wouldn't just shut the door, obviously. First and foremost, we determine age, region, appropriateness for our service. But if the person, if we're not able to immediately connect them, we'll still keep them on the line anyway and work through whatever the problem is. We want to make sure that they're connected to the appropriate service so that there's continuity of care and that they know where to call the next time around. But it's not just hang up the phone just because you're 14. It's let's make sure that we get you in touch with ROC today. Mm-hmm. We have, and the thing about COAST too, to bear in mind, it's a higher level of acuity in when it comes to crisis. And that might be someone who is feeling suicidal, who has suicidal ideation. They're in the midst of an anxiety or a panic attack. They're in a very deep depression and they are not getting out of bed and they need some kind of, human connection. It may be a family member who's calling in to report an incident of developing psychosis with their their young teenager or mid-20s child, and they need guidance on what steps to take next. It may be concerned citizens reporting someone who's elderly who is showing signs of dementia that they have concerns about, or a community report of alarming behavior with someone who's clearly unwell and is in need of some kind of intervention. So we will follow up on all of those, but if it's not the right call for us, we're going to track that person and find out who we can connect them with and what other services are more appropriate for them.
Okay, great. And how about Dara and Deb? Is it a similar approach for you if someone called you, and maybe wasn't the most appropriate connection? Do you handle it in a similar way?
Yeah, just like Peggy said, when someone calls in, that's taken a lot of courage to make that phone call. And so you want to encourage them to have a conversation. And sometimes it could be the wrong call. And at the Distress Centre, they're calling in anonymously. So we can direct them to whatever service might be appropriate. We direct a lot of people to ROC. COAST does refer people to us after their crisis is over. So we are a bit of, at the Distress Centre, we are a bit of a referral site for people, because when you are in distress, you don't think as clearly as you usually would, and you need that gentle referral. It's not dial a referral. It's, I'm upset about something and I don't know if this is the right phone call to make. And we walk the person through it all the time, assessing it, because to differentiate with distress with us. Distress is often the discomfort someone's going through, but that can bubble up and that can escalate. And then crisis is often the critical turning point. So it's figuring out where the person is in that line, because we do suicide risk assessment as well, plan the safety plan. And some of our volunteers also work with Crisis Services Canada, our national suicide line. So you want to make certain you are referring the person to the right line, while always being so appreciative and kind to them for making that phone call in, even if it was a completely wrong phone call.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a phone call, it's a connection, right? And so how can we build on that? That's great.
We would do something very similar. We would just meet the person where they're at when they call. They would identify what the reason for the call is. And as we're moving through the stages of the call, from confidentiality to making a plan near the end, we would have identified if our line was the most appropriate, or if our ROC services were most appropriate, or if the community services were going to meet their needs. Sometimes people call from outside the community. We'll redirect them and find the services that match the ones they're looking for through our line in their home community and give them those numbers and resources. So we would not turn a caller away. We would not define that the reason they called us wasn't an appropriate one. We would just help them navigate to the right and most supportive place.
Mm-hmm. That's great. So very similar approaches, which is good to know that, those connections are being made. So I'm going to direct this question to Dara, because I know we've heard a lot, we're coming up to a year into the pandemic, and we've heard a lot about how this can affect people's mental health and how thoughts of suicide are increasing across Canada, as the research is showing. So in terms of the pandemic, what have you seen in terms of how the pandemic has been affecting people that are calling your service? What are they talking about?
We have noticed an increase in intensity of the calls. We have been here for befriending calls, and we've noticed those befriending calls now have an element of panic. We find that people are getting triggered to a higher level of anxiety. We're finding people confused. We're finding people more that were distressed before in a higher level of distress, that it has bubbled up. We're getting different types of calls from custody arrangements, people really upset about changing custody during lockdown. We're getting a lot of angry calls. We have seen an increase in depressed calls, but we've also seen a lot more of referrals from psychologists to the distress line, because people don't want to be analyzed. They just need to vent. They need to have a non-judgmental conversation sometimes with someone, and just letting someone tell their story helps out so much. So we're starting to see, again, to summarize, just an intensity of the calls, more calls, but more complicated calls. That's what I would say.
And that's great.
And longer calls. We're starting to see the call. People need to be talked with longer.
Mm-hmm. That says a lot about your volunteers, that they've been able to adapt and still, provide that service when things are changing. So that's great.
Yeah.
How about you in terms of Coast? Have you seen changes in terms of what people are looking for? Has there been an increase in calls, or what have you been seeing during the pandemic?
Similar to what Dara was saying, they're more complex, they're more intense. People are more depressed than ever due to the isolation and due to not having human contact. There's an increase in suicidal ideation attempts and unfortunately completion. And so what people are really looking for more than ever is just some human compassion, some kindness, some conversation. They respond well to a warm tone of voice. People are saying, it's the tone of your voice. I just needed to hear that warmth. And they really emphasize that. And what we do is we're trying to provide just a gentle shift in thinking. We can't get rid of the pandemic. We can't make all of the financial problems that have come with it go away. But that little shift in thinking and reminding people that we're wrapping up, it's getting better. Things will get better. They need to hear that. They need that reminder from someone who they can't see on the other side of the line. And we're there to provide that. And also humor whenever possible. When that's injected, makes such a difference. If we end on a laugh, I'll tell you, when I get to hear someone say, I just feel so much better at the end of the call, that's to me, that's a thing to be very grateful for. And if tone of voice and a little humor and a reminder that things are going to improve brings them to that point, then our job is good.
And those are the rewarding moments, right? Yeah, I know exactly. All of the things, that all of you do. Again, you're meeting people and interacting with people at very difficult times, very stressful times in their life. That's great that you have those experiences. It's okay, I feel, even though you are making a difference, to have someone say that, I'm sure means a lot. So Deb, in terms of youth that are contacting the the Rock Line, I know we hear a lot about how the pandemic is affecting our youth as well. Their activities, their socialization, their schooling has all changed, and we don't want to underestimate the impact that's having on their mental health. So what kinds of things are you seeing with the youth that are calling into your line during the pandemic?
For sure. So we have a lot of youth that are calling. They feel the isolation of not being able to do in-person schooling or go to the mall or go to a movie or go hang out with friends anywhere. They're really resenting sort of the ongoing period of pandemic lockdown that happened starting just this year. The first one, it was sort of like a bit of an ease of like, oh, I don't have to be in school. And what we expected to happen last March is now happening. The amount of strain that it's putting on people's resiliency, ability to navigate just even simple things like going to the grocery store. Parent-child conflict increases. Some kids are not even able to see another parent because there's two family homes. And so due to complications and concerns about exposure, they're not seeing the other parent. There's a lot of different expectations that are placed on them at a much younger age to be able to manage sort of that remoteness, that isolation, that staying back from, and that's taking a toll, right? It's taking a toll. The online schooling is overwhelming a lot of the youth. It's moving with its quadmesters. It's moving quite quickly and intensely through programs, and it's causing a lot of youth to feel like they're not being successful where they would have had more support in school. They're now having to rely often on their parents who are also trying to work full-time alongside them. So it's been quite complicated for them, and the cases that are calling are complex. There's a lot more of an increase in self-harm and suicide ideation. There's a lot more need for the mental health assessments, and with the COVID and pandemic restrictions, it's made it quite difficult for some families to navigate that system.
Yeah, you've really brought up as well, sort of, it might not just be the youth, say, that might call you, or the parents who might call Coast or Distress Centre Halton, but it's that whole family. It's that everyone's feeling stress, and so that's going to compound. If you feel like I can't talk to my parents or my family members because they're also stressed, I'm sure there's a lot going on for everybody. Great point there. So I think what a lot of you are saying is, yeah, this additional stress can really bubble up. I know is the term that Dara, you've used a couple times, and it's, I think, a question of reaching out to that support when people need it as early as they can, which I know is sometimes challenging. But just a last question for all of you here on that topic. If someone was thinking of reaching out to their service, what would you say to them? What would be your advice, or what would be your message to, Peggy, we'll start with you. If someone was considering reaching out to COAST, but they weren't really sure, what would you say to that person?
I would highly encourage it, because you have nothing to lose by anonymously reaching out and checking to see, kind of dipping your toe in the water and see if you make a connection. The connection is not always there. It doesn't always happen with the person that you get on the phone. And that does happen. But I would always say, don't give up, because there are many of us here on the other side of the line. You may make a good connection with someone, and it may make a difference in your life today. And we're just looking at today until we get through to tomorrow. And I always remind people that things really are going to get better.
I love that. Always having that hope. That's great.
Absolutely.
Dara, how about you? If someone was considering reaching out to Distress Centre Halton, what message would you have for that person?
Well, first, if they were questioning it, I would really commend them on their bravery to make that call, because making a call to a stranger for the first time can be pretty overwhelming. And as Peggy said, what do you have to lose? However, it takes a deep breath, and people often hang up a lot at first. But there are volunteers trained in active listening that are there for you. And as Peggy said, I'll echo, sometimes you may not connect with the person that you first get, but with the volume of volunteers that we do have, there's a chance you will make that true heart-to-heart connection and really feel validated by having your story told. We need to talk. We need to talk, but you really need another person who's skilled at listening. And in society, a lot of us have lost our listening. We're so eager to give us our opinion. And it feels so rewarding to have someone truly listen to you. There's a line that the average person, the average brain, can't differentiate between being listened to and being loved. It affects the same part of the brain. So when you think back to a time that you really felt listened to, rather than having your conversation hijacked at an old networking event back in ancient times when we got together. But when someone truly listened to you, you felt so connected to them that they didn't interrupt and they seemed interested in your story. So it's a different type of call that I think will really touch the person's heart. So I'll just leave with Peggy. What do you have to lose? There is someone there who's truly interested to hear your story.
That's great. We've touched on a couple of times just the value of listening and that empathy and just being able to share about what's going on in someone's life like that. The value of that cannot be overestimated.
The person is there to be there for you, and kind is the big word. And to have someone actively listen to you and have some kindness shared on the lines, it just lifts your soul up. So it really matters.
And Deb, just in our last few seconds here, what would you say if there was a youth who was mulling over maybe calling Rock? What would you say to that person?
I'd want them to know that we understand how much bravery and courage it takes to make that call. We wouldn't be telling them all of the answers to everything that they're calling us about. We would be pulling out their own resiliencies, their own skills, and their own self-knowledge. And that would go for a youth and or a parent that might be reaching out for some consultation around a concern that seems to be overwhelming to them at the time. They get to define what they need from us, and our job is to come alongside them and support them, guide them, and hopefully navigate them to an outcome that leaves them feeling empowered. That's what I would want them to know.
Yeah.
And hopefully people will be encouraged by that and feel hopeful that we have these amazing services in our community. And, on behalf of HPC, thank you so much for, HSPC, I forgot that S there. Thank you so much for being with us today for our webcast. And thank you so much for everything that you do for our community. And it's been, a very difficult time during the pandemic, but it's services like these that I feel our people really need to rely on and know that there is that listening and caring ear on the other end of the line. So thank you so much for sharing everything that your services do. And to everyone watching our webcast, stay tuned for future episodes of HSPC Connects, where we're going to have some other wonderful guests who will share with us their perspectives on suicide and suicide prevention. Thank you, everyone. Stay
Thank you,
safe.
Melanie. Thanks for
Thank
having us.
you.
Thank you.